Good morning, everybody. Now, today we need to talk about South Africa and what's happening there. It's a long way from the UK, a long way from America. Um, Maybe there's some people who do watch this in South Africa, so thank you for doing so. But we're hearing reports, not on the mainstream, but on alternative media, about how the country is collapsing. And this seems to be borne out by a warning given out just this week by the American embassy in South Africa to American citizens living in South Africa that they should stock up on food and water, prepper style, because of the rolling blackouts in the country, because there's not enough energy being supplied to keep the lights on in all the houses and all the businesses in the country. In fact, the energy company there's a single energy company called Exxon, I think, or Eskom, one of the two. Anyway, the energy company is only producing enough energy for 50% of South Africa's needs. Why this has happened over a number of years, that the energy infrastructure has been run down, I don't know the specifics of South Africa, but you can imagine it's a combination of crazy policies to replace oil, coal and gas with wind and solar power. I know that's going on all over Western Europe, North America and Australia, combined with the management being fired because of cultural Marxist policies. You see, you have a government in South Africa that is fully cultural Marxist, and they are trying to change society to overcome systemic oppression. Now, South Africa is a different case to the USA and the UK, etc., because there was real oppression in the apartheid era. But that's now 30 years ago. And when it ended, Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa, and he talked about building a rainbow nation where all the different skills of people will be celebrated and used, and we'll all work together to create a beautiful, harmonious rainbow nation. That doesn't seem to have happened, because subsequent governments reverted immediately to saying that whites are guilty, they need to give up their land, and we need to push them out of the positions that they're in. So yes, nobody under the age of 50 in South Africa is in any way guilty for the apartheid era. As I said, it ended 30 years ago, and you could sort of consider that everybody under the age of 20 at that time was either a child or a student. So it would only be people over the age of 20 who were at the time, so who are now over 50, who were in any way responsible for that. And a lot of them actually actively hated the apartheid era and wanted to bring it to a close because they saw that it was wrong. So, a lot of people over 50 as well actually fought to overturn that regime. So you can't blame the vast majority of white people for what happened over 30 years ago. But that's exactly what's happening now. And with affirmative action, this is the kind of thing that's now being brought in Western countries. What's it called? ESG, Environmental, Social and Governance programs, rules and structures, where they say that at every level, in every company, there has to be a certain quota of people of certain races to reflect society. So if they say that at every level in every business, you have to employ 80% black people, I don't know exactly what the figure is, but that's what they're doing in South Africa, then everybody who was there before, maybe it was 100% white, and they could have run the country very well because they knew what they were doing. But if you suddenly come along and say, well, 80% of you are fired, and we're going to put in 80% people because they're black, nothing wrong with that at all, but some of them just don't have the skills and the understanding and the experience of people who were there for a long time and many, many years and knew how to do things. So you put them in responsible positions in companies that are there to look after your national infrastructure, and things go wrong because they simply don't know how to do the job. It's not their fault. They just don't know how to do the job properly. And if you put people in positions where they don't know what they're doing, then things are going to go wrong. I mean, it's just basic, simple common sense. Yes, you can change things slowly, but you should always do it on the premise that you employ the best person for the job, the most experienced, the most able person, the person who's going to do it most efficiently and most effectively, not on the basis of skin color, whether it's pro-white or pro-black. You just don't do that. It doesn't lead to good outcomes in terms of the company's businesses and infrastructure you're running. So that is another factor in what is causing societal breakdown, because the government has said we're going to put all these people in jobs, and more than half of them don't know what they're doing. So of course it's going to create chaos, and it has created chaos. So that is what's happening in South Africa, as well as general economic collapse that is going on. Now there's been a lot of posts about this, and they've been reported in a lot of different outlets. But I'm just going to read to you that this is in an outlet called Natural News that is reproduced a thread on Twitter by an account called Zombieland. I guess that's relating to South Africa. And this is what it says. I'll just bring this up here so you can see that. I'll read the whole thread out to you because it gives a lot of information and detail about what's happening and how life is and how society is just completely collapsed, not just socially and culturally, but economically as well. So it says this: South Africa has collapsed. The US Embassy is now informing international travellers to stock up prepper style on food and water. City Power has an average turnaround time of 2 to 3 days for grid repairs. They don't have the manpower, supplies, nor funds, and they've already used this year's budget. South Africa is in a state of chaos as the nation grapples with a variety of issues. The economic crisis has led to a rise in unemployment and poverty, while political tensions have caused widespread civil unrest. As if that weren't enough, South Africa is dealing with a surge in crime, particularly gang violence, and an increase in the number of drug-related deaths. The government has been criticised for its failure to tackle these issues, leaving South Africans feeling increasingly frustrated and hopeless. We're seeing an increase in coordinated attacks on water, power, and comms infrastructure. Looting is no longer just a daily thing, but is also now becoming more structured, with guerrilla planning involved. Our roads no longer exist. Anything that is state-run is crumbling. Police, fire, and hospital resources for the state don't exist and are all also slowly disintegrating. So Eskom, that's the power producer. South Africa's only power producer, is averaging 50% or less power output, plunging massive parts of our country into rolling blackouts. The decay in general amazes me. Roads are shot, infrastructure is collapsing, anything that isn't bolted down is stolen, and what is bolted down is grinded off. I think that should be ground off, but never mind. The cost of living is insane. Fuel is expensive. Medical aid is a luxury that most cannot afford. Food costs are going through the roof. I myself can literally barely pay for new pants, meaning trousers. The South African government now wants to put through expropriation without compensation, where land is taken from rightful and legal landowners and given to the previously disadvantaged. Our Navy, Army and Air Force are done. Troops are buying their own boots. Army bases are being looted for copper. Vehicles and machinery are being cannibalized for parts. Our murder rate is higher than the death rate in Ukraine's current conflict, higher than an active war zone with huge numbers of rapes, kidnappings and hijackings every day. And farmers are being murdered in the most brutal ways imaginable. And it goes on a little bit further and actually talks about there being sewage everywhere in the streets and the rivers and oceans at the end. So tragic situation. in South Africa. It's a country I know very well because before I was in politics, I was a chemistry teacher, and I spent 2 years teaching chemistry in Botswana, which borders South Africa at the north. But I was there in 1999 and 2000, and I spent a lot of time in holidays, in sort of term breaks, traveling to South Africa, and I did a big trip around it during Millennium time. It's an absolutely beautiful country. At the time, it was had a really, an atmosphere of hope about it back in the day. That's nearly 25 years ago now, because people really genuinely believed that, they could bring everything together and build a prosperous nation for all groups there, despite the past. I had a fantastic time traveling around South Africa and seeing it. But some of the things in that report there, that Twitter thread I just read out, do remind me of some things that I did see in some places. Despite it being a fantastic place for me to go as a traveller, I avoided certain areas because there were certain areas you just didn't go to, because even then, hijackings were a common occurrence. If you went into the wrong part of Johannesburg or, the wrong part of Cape Town or something, you just didn't go there. Crime was very high. The murder rate was very high, even 20 years ago. So now it's gone even higher because essentially there is no border. There's absolutely no border control. When I was there, 20 years ago, the population was 40 million. Now it's about 60 million. And people have come in from all over Africa to South Africa, and a lot of them are just setting up organized crime. And that's how they live, just by cannibalizing, what other people have, stealing what other people have. And very interesting thing they're talking about, even taking parts off of vehicles and off of infrastructure in military bases and around. There's one thing I had an interesting little experience. I went to Malawi when I lived in Africa. I went there one holiday and stayed by Lake Malawi, which is another beautiful place. But some of the locals would do is they would cut the copper wires out of the phone boxes and the phone lines and turn them into jewellery, or what they called jewellery. They just get these copper wires and shape them in a shape of an animal or something and sell them to the tourists, and to make a bit of money. And stupidly, some people bought these things not realising where they'd come from. But then we realised none of the phone lines work, because some of the local people had been cutting out all the copper from the phone lines and turning it into little trinkets to sell to the tourists, meaning that they were cannibalizing the infrastructure. And so any time it was fixed, almost immediately it would get broken again, because they go back and steal the copper out of it to make things, or steal the wires out of it to make things. That was what happened, a little experience I had when I went to Malawi, which at the time, of course, is much, much poorer than South Africa. But that seems to be what's happening in South Africa now, that things are so bad that people are just cannibalizing the infrastructure, and there's nobody there to repair it. Well, there are still some people, but far fewer than before, because either people are not working as many, not as many people are being employed, because they don't have as much money, because there's an economic collapse, which is in a vicious circle, like a downward spiral, as well as some of the people who are employed just don't know what they're doing. So things just aren't getting fixed at the rate in which they're getting broken, or, whether that's just by things naturally breaking down because they come to the end of their life cycle as a sort of part in the infrastructure, or whether people are actively attacking it and taking bits for themselves, or destroying it. So this is what's going on in South Africa, and the whole country is falling into collapse. So much so, as I said at the beginning, that the American embassy, the governments in the West would say, they always say to her, "Oh, you're prepping for a catastrophe. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're a tinfoil hat nut job." But now they're actually telling people in South Africa to do the exact same thing that until just a week ago they were saying, if you do this, you're crazy. Now they're telling people to prep. Well, it's a little bit late actually now, because the country's already fallen into collapse. So if you want to get ready and prep, you need to start doing it, months or maybe years beforehand to actually get ready. But one of the worst things there is what's happening to white farmers in South Africa, and this has been going on for decades. It was going on when I was there 20 years ago, not to the same extent as it is now, but you'd have some people come along, they're Marxists, and they massacre the people, the farmers there and their families, and then they take the land. Now this is the government. Now that was, everybody considered that wrong at the time, but now you have a full Marxist government that is saying they want expropriation without compensation. So families that have been on the land for centuries in places where, when Europeans came to the Cape, the Western Cape around there were no African Bantus there at all. There were Bushmen, and so on. They were there, but there weren't any of the black African tribes. They just simply weren't in the Western Cape. So a lot of white farmers set up in that area to make farms and so on. But now here we are in the beginning of the 21st century. They have a Marxist government, which is fully cultural Marxist as well, and is saying, for social justice, we're going to take your land and your farms and your property and just expropriate it and give it to their supporters, I imagine. That's what happened in Zimbabwe under Mugabe, starting in 1980. And Zimbabwe is now an economic basket case, again, because they took the land from people who knew how to farm it, gave it to people who didn't know what to do with it, and they just simply are not able to produce the same amount of crops as the people who had it and knew what they were doing. And so Zimbabwe turned into an absolute basket case. Their currency went, when they had independence in 1980, there was one Zimbabwe dollar to £1. Now there's millions of Zimbabwe dollars to £1. So anything you had in Zimbabwe dollars has just vanished into the air. And it looks like South Africa's going the same way. I mean, when I was there was 10 rand to the pound. Now I think there's something like 18 rand to the pound. So it's gone down nearly half, and the pound has gone down against the dollar as well since the year 2000. So, the rand has gone down more than half against the dollar. And the dollar itself has gone down against real money like gold and silver and assets like property. And so, the dollar's lost a lot of its value in the last 20 years. The rand's lost even more value, and it looks like it's on its way out as well. It is an incredible tragedy. I hope that they can turn it around, but it doesn't look like they're going to be able to with the government that they've got in place, which is Marxist and which is actually causing the chaos, or is one of the causes of chaos through net zero, not controlling their borders, not controlling crime, destroying small businesses and farmsteads which are productive and which employ people. And that leads to more unemployment, more poverty, and they're creating a vicious cycle, both socially and economically. And this is what happens when you get a Marxist communist government in place. And sadly, in the West, it seems that that's the kind of government that we've got in most places. We have a fake conservative government in the UK that is implementing Marxist policies, socialist policies, cultural Marxism, in terms of all this wokery, and not quite to the level of South Africa, where they're insisting that every level in every company you have a certain quota of people by race, but they're trying to bring this in by gender in the UK, and in some places they're even suggesting doing it by race. I don't think that will happen in the UK, but that's obviously, you have this kind of affirmative action in some places in the USA as well, and it's just a disaster every time it happens. So this is what's happening in South Africa. If we don't turn things around in Western Europe and in North America and in Australia and New Zealand, we're going to go the same way, and we're going to be where South Africa is in 5 to 10 years' time. So it's absolutely essential we turn things around in our countries here as well. I'm very sorry to my friends in South Africa for what's happening to your country. I hope you can do something to turn it around. And our thoughts and prayers are with you.